All right. Good morning, everybody. I think mostly everybody is kind of here. I'm not sure. Annie, do you want to say a few words or do you want me to just get started?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the July 2018 Coffee and CU events. Today, we have Beth Garrison from Auburn Coffee and Shaping Development here to present for us. We're very grateful. Um, she is the secretary of the DBA SIG, and we're all very excited to see what she's going to present today. Just as an FYI, we are going to be using two different metrics in order to two different metrics to collect information in terms of giving you a certificate. So we're going to be collecting attendance, and we're also going to be collecting answers from a quick survey that we will send out after this presentation. And once that's sent in, we will be able to send you your free certificate from the DBA SIG. And if any of you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at our email, which is disseminateaba@gmail.com. And that's about it. So if you have any other questions as well, please also feel free to communicate that via the chats. We're here to answer them as fast as we can. All right, so I'm going to pass the baton over to you.
All right. Hi, everybody. So, how many of you have your coffee this morning? I have mine. I am the founder and CEO of Auburn Coffee. We started I keep saying we, but it's really just me. I started the business in November of 2017, really to look at and focus on disseminating our science and the use of coffee to disseminate our science to a new industry and also to utilize it with disseminating our science to people who might not be within our field because a lot of people like coffee. So that is something that, I think is important, and we can definitely utilize that. In my journey of starting the business and learning a lot more about coffee than I had previously, I started to see a lot more ways that our science can benefit the industry of coffee, as well as obviously let them help us kind of with dissemination of our own science. So today's discussion is really going to cover a lot of those topics. So I'm going to do some different things today. I have a little bit of a fun game for us to play in the beginning. I'm going to talk a little bit about behavior analysis and how it could support the industry. And then towards the end, I'm opening it up for all of us to have a discussion as far as different ideas and strategies and suggestions or any questions you might have about how potentially behavior analysis could help this industry. So I'm going to get started. If you guys want to unmute yourself, because this is the interactive portion of today. So you do that, and then everybody can just shout out at once. That'll be really fun, I think, especially for the recording. All right. So our objectives, we're going to learn about the background of coffee. Some of you are probably pretty familiar with it. Hopefully I can bring to the table some new fun facts about the coffee plant, which I've been learning along the way. And hopefully people can hear me about behavior analysis and how it can help support environmentally friendly and sustainable business practices. So thinking about how we can utilize our science to support that. And then we're going to talk. So that's the very end. We're going to talk and just touch base. So some of the different parallels I did want to start with, because Annie told me I should share these with you. So there's been a therapy. So the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave being what Hayes has discussed in his, a lot of his work. Well, the interesting parallel is coffee is also now in its third wave of, I guess, interest in the industry, in the field. So I think it's really cool that we're kind of like at the same part of that. So that was a little fun fact I wanted to share. So if everybody wants to unmute, we're going to get started because I want to play a game. All right. Everybody knows that, potentially knows that movie. If not, it's okay. You can look it up or not if you don't want to have nightmares. Coffee grows on trees. True or false?
Oh, true.
You can throw it in the chat if you want, or
True.
True. Everybody says true.
True.
True. Miguel, you're not allowed to play because you know all the answers. I'm kidding. True. Everybody's right. Excellent. So this is actually an actual coffee tree. It's kind of a tree. It's more of like a shrub. So an evergreen shrub is the coffea plant. So it comes from the coffea plant, Coffea, and it is actually grown on this evergreen shrub. And Erin says she has screaming children, so she's not going to put herself on volume. So it grows on this evergreen shrub, and it is more of a tree than not. So next question. Coffee is a fruit.
True.
True. True.
So I'm waiting for some. Okay, so I think most people are saying true. Maybe that's kind of my answer. The seeds are actually from the cherry of the coffea plant. So you could potentially say it's a fruit. I like to say it's a fruit because then I can hit my food groups for the day, coffee. But the actual seed is, you're not eating the cherry, so technically you're not eating the fruit part. But hey, I say it's a fruit. That's just me. So you can say whatever you want. So that's a maybe. Next one. Coffee plants grow quickly. True or false?
False.
False.
So coffee does not grow quickly. It takes about 5 years for a coffee plant to grow to start to where it's producing cherries. So it starts and then it takes about 5 years for it to grow. During that time, it is highly susceptible for a lot of problems. There's pests. It can be exposed a lot about more in this training. But it does take a really long time for a coffee plant to grow, 5 years. So for the farmers who farm the coffee, it's a very large investment of time as well as money because they're putting in basically 5 years to grow if they're starting from scratch, they're starting the work and not seeing any production until 5 years in. So it takes a while for it to start to produce cherries. Now that's an average. There are some plants obviously that will grow quicker, some slower, depends on the situation, but the average is about 5 years. So it does take a while. Coffee plants can outlive humans.
True.
Yeah. True.
Up to 100 years. So there are some strains of coffee plants that are actually about 100 years old. So they've found some strains that are still around. Sorry, my internet I think keeps going in and out. Between the years 7 and 20. So between 7 years and 20 years, that's when they're really producing the cherries for the coffee seeds. They can continue to produce fruit and it can continue to be used, but they can live pretty long. So that's an interesting fun fact about coffee. Coffee is grown in the bean belt. is an easy one.
True.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a picture of the bean belt from this photo credit from the Grind Cafe. So here is a picture of just what it kind of looks like and the different kinds of flavors that you can see with each of the coffees that are grown in the bean belt. And if you notice, it is right along the equator. So right along the equator is where you'll see that. The other piece that it's really interesting to note is in South America, Africa, and in these parts of Asia, you see high mountainous regions where the coffee is grown. So it favors the climate equator, the climate of the equator, and then also favors the high altitudes, depending on obviously which coffee. We'll get to that next, but it does favor some high altitudes for growing. So it is along the bean belt where coffee is mainly grown. Look at Florida, though. It's just on that border. Maybe we could start a push, have Florida start growing some coffee for our Florida people. But yeah, so that is the bean belt. Awesome. All right. So next question. All coffee tastes the same.
False.
False. Definitely.
Nope. That is false. You are absolutely right. Coffee varies. Obviously, brewing style can change the taste of coffee. Roasting style can change the taste of coffee. But even just the pure seeds themselves from different countries, even from different farms, can change the taste of coffee. It depends on the country, depends on the soil, depends on the farm, the water supply that the farm is using to make the coffee and grow it. Some of you are probably familiar with the term single origin. So when we talk about single origin coffee, typically what it is it comes from one single geographical location or area. It may not be from one single farm, although sometimes it is, but typically it's from farms clustered in the same geographical area. So when people say that they're selling, which is a big hot topic now in the coffee world, is single origin coffee versus blends. Opera coffee, we do blends, but there's a lot of talk now about single origin and if it's better or if it's not. To be honest, I think it's open to interpretation per person. But yeah, the taste, even from the seed itself, is dependent on the soil and the origin of country where it's from. So that's a big no. There are 2 types of coffee species.
False? Maybe?
False.
Oh, Lindsay knows her stuff. So does Lisa. There are 2. So it's Arabica and Robusta. So I'm sure most of you have heard about Arabica beans, and I'm saying this from my Philly accent, which I'm sure some of you guys can hear. But the Arabica beans make up 70% of the world's production of coffee. This is mainly grown in higher altitudes, such as different mountain ranges, things like that. They are highly susceptible to insects. And they need a lot of attention from the farmers. The Robusta bean can be grown at sea level, but it only makes up 30% of the world's production. They're very hardy, but they're also very high in caffeine. So interestingly, I don't think I've ever had a Robusta blend for coffee. I don't know if you guys had.
If Robusta is easier to grow, why don't they grow more of it?
That's a great question. I was actually going to kind of bring that up in my talk. But I think, yeah, you're right. That's an awesome question because if it's easier to grow, you can grow it at sea level, which is a much larger span of land. It should be potentially grown more. I think the cost to grow it is a little bit more extreme. So that would be the downfall. And a lot of the farmers that grow coffee, it's very cost prohibitive potentially for them to do that. So, but yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk about that as we go, as different ideas to improve the industry. As far as that has been suggested by many people in the field, as in let's maybe start to shift to the production of Robusta versus Arabica beans. That's a great point. Thank you. All right. Coffee cherries have 2 seeds.
True.
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 Yes, that's actually what it looks like.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's actually a fruit, clearly. And this is the pulp that surrounds the seeds. They have to, yeah, sorry, Erin. I think people might be having trouble hearing me, but that's kind of where I am by my internet right now. I'm trying. So here's an example of the coffee seed. It is the cherry. It's got 2 seeds. There's pulp around it that they have to basically power wash essentially to get it off, or dry. So that's another option. So there's different processing ways to get this out. And then there's like the little seed inside. Interestingly, has any of you ever heard of pea berry coffee?
No.
So pea berry coffee is actually a mutation of the coffee plant. There will be some cherries that only have 1 seed, and that typically is the pea berry seed. There's actually like strains that are grown in Hawaii because it's very highly sought after because it's a mutation, and obviously people love things that are in limited supply. And it actually tastes really good. I've had some. It's a sweeter kind of coffee than a typical coffee bean, but there is a mutation sometimes in the cherries that will produce 1 seed, and that is called pea berry coffee. And actually farmers are trying to produce more of it, so they're trying to actually reproduce the mutation in the coffee itself.
What did they do with the berry part of the coffee?
The berry part? What do you mean? Oh, I think it's just called the pea berry because it's just it's like tinier.
No, I mean, like, if you take the seed out to make coffee beans, what do you do with the rest of the berry part? Like, do they eat it? Does it just get wasted?
It's a good question. It depends on the farm. It depends on what they do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That is definitely a good question. Sometimes they use it for their livestock and they'll mix it in, but a lot of times it does typically get wasted. So that is a great point. Thank you. All right, great work, guys. I like the little smiley face in this picture. So I'm going to kind of move forward and talk a little bit about the issues that are affecting the coffee plant. We alluded to some of these in the true-false questions, but I do want to kind of touch base about this because this kind of sets up with us how behavior analysis can really help with the industry itself. So the first is hygiene and food safety. So one of the major issues that are surrounding coffee is the lack of resources, typically in areas that coffee is grown, as far as water is concerned, and also looking at the actual safety of the food itself. So I'm going to start with hygiene first. So hygiene is a major component. There actually used to be very little regulations as far as coffee is concerned when we do food safety. The FDA just recently in 2004, I believe it was, passed a law stating that coffee needed to follow the same food safety regulations in the United States as all other packaged foods. It was not regulated until 2004. So there was lots of, obviously, there could have definitely be potential contaminants, things like that. Hygiene sometimes, as far as hand washing and purification of materials used in the farming to roasting process, may not always be. Miguel.
Sorry.
Nope. Back again. All right. So the hygiene and food safety part of this. So the obviously resources can be limited for the farmers that grow the coffee. So typically they may not always use the best hygiene practices, hand washing, purification of materials used in farming. And then, as I said, the FDA just recently in 2004 passed the rules that coffee must be under the same food safety regulations as everything else that is packaged and sold in the United States, which includes labeling of the product. So some of you may have noticed if you buy lots of coffee that your coffee labels may have changed recently in the last couple years to have different things that are on the labels themselves, and that's part of the regulations. So this is a big issue that's been affected because there's a lot of farms and areas that don't necessarily always follow food safety guidelines because there's very little regulation and oversight as far as that's concerned. So this is a pretty big issue. The other issue is physical safety of the farmers themselves. It's a very hard, back-breaking job to grow coffee. They have to sometimes carry things. There's not a lot of technological resources. Here we have machines that can kind of help us with some of this, but a lot of times those resources are not available. So the physical safety aspect of growing coffee is definitely something to keep in mind. The other thing to think about too is a lot of the farms that grow coffee are typically family businesses. So you'll have someone working the fields potentially as young as 7 or 8 years old. So there is a lot of children sometimes who do work. Now, the United Nations has set up some regulations that obviously children should not be working as long hours, etc. America, on farms in America, their kids help out on the farm, and that's part of it. So, but as far as physical safety is concerned, it is a concern because you obviously want to make sure that people are protected from the elements and from all the different things there. I also wanted to kind of go back a little bit to food safety, which I forgot to cover. One of the major issues that affects coffee is pests, so bugs. And if you saw in the previous slide about Arabica coffee beans, they're really highly susceptible to bugs and pests. So sometimes coffee farmers will use pesticides in their coffee for growing the coffee, and that can be potentially dangerous depending on what pesticides are being used. But if we think about it too, if we're thinking about the physical safety aspect of it, if we have children who are around this and being exposed to pesticides as well as human beings, and they're not taking proper precautions about physical safety, wearing masks, safety issues. So these are all things that definitely affect in the growth of coffee. The other issue is financial. So I talked about earlier before that it takes 5 years for a coffee plant to grow. And that's a large investment of time as well as financial resources for parents or for families who grow the coffee, for farmers that grow the coffee, for anybody who's involved. So basically you put out your investment of this coffee farm, this acreage, and it takes you 5 years to have your first producing cherry. That is a long time. That's a lot of cost, and there's a lot of time that's involved with that. The coffee industry ebbs and flows. It's based off of demand. It's based off of supply as well. In the early 2000s, there was a large shortage of coffee because there was a rust outbreak in the leaves. So because of the rust outbreak, a lot of the plants died off, and that can be a huge financial issue for farmers because, again, you have your beautiful acres of coffee growing, rust occurs, you got to start from scratch again. So there are a lot of financial issues that affect the coffee industry. The other issue that's always been the case There are some things that have been put in place to help with this, but the wages of the coffee farmers themselves, if there's been some help push towards moving towards fair trade certified coffee, which typically will pay a minimum amount per pound to the farmers. So the minimum amount per pound for fair trade certified coffee is $1.40 a pound to the farmers. However, if a coffee farm is not part of a fair trade co-op, they could be paid as little as 3 cents a pound for their coffee. So that's a really wide range in basically pay for the coffee farmers themselves. So there is a push to be moving to the fair trade certified, obviously, because there's a minimum there. There's actually some creativity with that push as well, and I'm going to talk about that when we talk about behavior analysis in helping the coffee industry. Some farmers have started to come up with their own solutions to this, which I think is a really awesome kind of idea. But with anything, there is a time delay. So if you start your farm, it's going to take you 5 years before you have that first cherry to even start selling your coffee. With that said, once you finally farm your cherries and you or it's the seeds, and you process them and you send them to wherever it is that is buying it, there's a time delay in getting your pay as well. So there's a lot of financial commitments that the farmers have to make when they're working with this. And the last one's environmental. So I mentioned earlier there's pesticides, a lot of pesticides sometimes used with coffee's plant growing, mainly because of the fact that it's a constant maintenance to make sure that their coffee grows and does not fall susceptible to dying, because it does take so long. Because it does take so long with growing. So there's a lot of environmental factors there. So there's the pesticides used, there's water pollution. So a lot of times in the processing of the coffee, you guys remember seeing that the seeds were covered with that pulpy substance. They will use water to do a wet processing. So it's almost like a power washing of the seeds so that they can get the pulp off of the seeds. And when that happens, that kind of pollutes a lot of the water. They're using up a lot of the water that they may not otherwise have, and it goes towards the production of the coffee. So that's environmental. And the biggest one, which I'm going to talk about, is climate change. So climate change is a very real thing, and it is affecting our coffee. So with global warming happening, the coffee areas, and I do have references at the end so you guys can look this up, but with global warming, the areas that are previously grown coffee are drying out, and they're not able to produce as much water to grow the coffee plants that they need. So what's happening is there's a shift. There's a geographical shift happening in the growing of coffee, where they're moving from different one geographical area to another geographical area. Either the farmers themselves are migrating, or the coffee production itself is migrating to those areas where it's more favorable to grow coffee because of the climate change. There's a lot of issues that are involved with that. So one, farmers who have lived in one place their entire life and have grown coffee their entire lives now have to pick up and move to someplace completely different so that they can grow their coffee. There's the other side of it, that the people who are where they're moving to have not been ingrained into a coffee farming culture. So there's a lot of cultural issues that are arising now with the shifts of the farms to different areas because of climate change. And this is primarily happening a lot in Ethiopia. So I know a lot of our followers are big fans of Ethiopian coffee, but this is a huge issue that's affecting Ethiopia right now, where it's the climate change is forcing the geographical migration of the farmers and the farms to different areas that may not have otherwise produced coffee up until now. So those are the issues that we see when that we're currently facing in the coffee industry. So the larger question is, how can behavior analysis help create environmentally friendly and a sustainable coffee economy? So I'm going to try and answer some of those questions and maybe towards the end, we can all brainstorm a little bit as far as what you guys think, and maybe think about ways that we could potentially benefit the industry. But I came up with some of my own ideas, and hopefully, you guys can kind of come up with some too. So the biggest issue that we need to address is safety. So the hygiene, the food safety issues, the physical safety issues of the farms and the farmers themselves. There's also the safety of the roasters. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to pick up my coffee that we use, and they're a wholesaler as well. But it can be pretty dangerous. The roasting process, it's backbreaking. They got to carry all the heavy bags of coffee. The roaster itself is pretty hot. It can burn. You can have burns. So there's a lot of different safety issues that are part of the production of coffee. So how can behavior analysis help with this? Well, we have an entire section of behavior analysis dedicated to this. So this is from Aubrey Daniels. Behavior-based safety is the application of the science of behavior analysis to issues of safety in the workplace. So really looking at different ways that we can utilize behavior-based safety approaches. Aubrey Daniels has a whole lot of information on this on his website, as well as his research. Beth Sulzer Azaroff in the 80s wrote a lot of articles in the Journal of Organization Behavior Management about behavior-based safety. But we need to think about that. I think really coming at it with the aspect of educating people about safety issues, providing incentive systems potentially to increase the safety of the of people, anywhere from the farmers to the roasters to your barista in the coffee shop. These are all different things that behavior-based safety strategies and interventions can be used in to benefit the field and to address these issues. There's also technology, resources, things we can use, thinking a little bit outside the box as far as how can we get the farmers to access more resources to technology so that they're maybe able to safely work on their farms, the use of machines, things like that. So these are all different ways we can definitely help, I think, in this issue, because we have an entire sector of our science dedicated to this. The last issue I kind of want to cover is environment and culture. So how can behavior analysis really help with this environmental and cultural shift that's happening? Primarily, like I said, in Ethiopia, coffee farms along the bean belt is with the climate change, the migrational change of the geographical location of the farms to different areas. So one of the things to think about is, from the environment perspective, is how can we reduce waste? And I think somebody brought it up earlier. So there's a lot of waste involved when we're talking about coffee production. So there's water waste when they're using it to do the water processing of the coffee. There is waste of the cherry itself, because we just kind of throw it out. Maybe there's some use for the cherry that we could use. So there's been a lot of studies, especially in the Journal of Organization Behavior Management, about using incentive systems to reduce waste. So this would be a potential option. Maybe thinking about looking at pairing that fair trade certified kind of stuff with incentive systems that reduce the waste during the coffee process. I know this is something that I am particularly passionate about in our own company. So Opera Coffee, we partner with Philly Fair Trade Roasters, and they are extremely environmentally friendly. They compost, they recycle everything. They use very little. They don't have a lot of waste when they're producing my coffee, which I'm a big fan of. So a lot of what they use is very environmentally friendly, because that's what's important to them. So some of this also might come into values-based instruction for people, as far as what are your values? How can we make this a value to make things environmentally friendly for you? And then also thinking about, so I touched base on the incentive systems, but also thinking about teaching new skills. So with the migrational shift of these farmers to different areas, there are people in these areas that this is a new source of income for them potentially to start coffee farming. It's been handed down from another generation to their generation for teaching and instruction. So how can we teach these potential new coffee farmers in these new geographical areas the skill of farming? One idea I came up with was really looking at precision teaching. So precision teaching, training and performance feedback strategies, maybe a combination of the two, to kind of really bring these new coffee farmers up to speed with the actual skill of learning how to farm coffee, because it is going to be shifting to these new areas and thinking about using these strategies that we have in our science to teach these new skills to the new coffee farms. So that's kind of what I came up with. I wanted to definitely give a lot of time to talk and answer questions and brainstorm. So what are your guys' thoughts? How do we think that we could potentially utilize behavior analysis to support the industry, considering all of the issues that I kind of laid out?
We can introduce more safety equipments for the farmers. Like they have to carry heavy loads of coffee beans to like the roaster, maybe like equipping them with either like those safety stuff that construction workers usually wear to help support their back when they carry things, or like giving them some kind of like simple tool, not like big machineries, but like simple ways to carry your loads of coffee beans to roaster, just to make it more safe for the farmers and the roasters and whatnot.
Yeah, I agree. I think technology is going to play a big role in this in the next couple years, is thinking about ways that we can utilize technology to increase safety for these different things that people are going to need to do. A lot of it is coming down to resources. But with that said, I have done some research. There's a lot of organizations like the International Coffee Organization. So I actually have that in my references section. The International Coffee Organization actually supplies grants to people for coming up with ideas to support the coffee industry. They have a mission to educate and help with the safety concerns that are arising with the coffee industry, as well as the environmental concerns. So there's a lot of grants and things that is available that I think that even people in our science should utilize, and maybe start looking at researching at ways that we could use our science to support this industry. So that's a great point. Yeah, just increasing the use of resources that people have to increase safety.
I can't help but think, what about using something like tag teach? So Beth and I, funny enough, we went to this really neat conference just a few weeks ago concerning tag teach and its implementations in very different realms. And if, say, a potential issue is how things are how folks are lifting very heavy bags of beans and what have you, maybe what can be done is a system where you use tag teach to teach that particular skill of lifting appropriately and safely without hurting, say, your back or straining your back and what have you. I wonder if something like that could also be implemented just for general safety.
Yeah, I really like that idea from a physical safety perspective, using that method of teaching, which it kind of is combined with precision teaching with fluency based measures, looking at like what's the specific behavior and how many, can they get to that behavior with mastery. But I like the tag teach idea, because you're going to cue specific behaviors during that process that they're going to have to do. I think one of the major things that I struggle with is from a cultural standpoint. Behavior analysis is not very well known in this industry, definitely, because when I go to coffee places, I'm like, people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a behavior analyst. And they're like, what's that? So it's not very well known. So my thought was the dissemination piece, and definitely getting to that and talking to people more about that. But there's also a cultural and motivational thing there too, as far as there's a certain way that people do things, and for some people they do it that way because it's reinforcing, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't keep doing it. So how do we change those behaviors? So for example, the water behavior, so like using the to be honest, using a large amount of water to process the coffee is one easy way to separate the seed out and to do that. But it's the quickest way to get it done. And as we know, for coffee farmers, time is not on their side. So what are some ways that we might be able to motivate them to potentially think about the waste, the water waste, or anything like that that's part of the process?
I wonder if you could do something where you set goals and kind of figure out what their baseline water use is, and then set a goal that's just below it, and then have some sort of reinforcement, and then continue to lower that goal to lower amounts of water. And so that way, kind of reinforcing them to slowly over time use less and less water.
Like a DRL.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that could be something. What about I mean, like, do you think there's a way to hit it from like an antecedent side of things? Like, how can we create essentially the MO for people to actually want to conserve water? Because I think that is another piece, is that may not always be there. I think I stumped everybody. I mean, that one's tough, I think, definitely. But I think that's where people, like, I kind of am at this point where I'm a little bit struggling to kind of come up with ideas from a broader scale. I think we do need to start small. So maybe we start with one farm in some place where somebody can have that connection. We create a system, we collect data. First, we collect our baseline data to see where we are. We implement maybe some sort of behavior-based safety system or incentive system, or maybe we do like some sort of precision teaching. We focus on that goal, whatever that goal is with that particular farm. We implement our system, and then we collect data to see if it was effective. And we start with that one farm, and then we go from the one farm to maybe replicating it to another. And if maybe we can show the farmer, or even up to the roaster, depending on where we are in the process, that this is something that will work and will make their job and quality of life a little easier, it could spread.
Well, I think with the water problem is I don't understand the process, like, do they use a lot of water to get the bean out of there? Can you recycle the water? Like, what exactly is the problem beside using too much water? Like, if it's
Well,
the problem. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that would be the problem. I mean, essentially overuse, and then basically it just doesn't get reused. If there's a way to collect it and then somehow recycle it, that would be a possibility.
Well, if it
But there are two different ways to process beans. So there are seeds. There's the dry process, and then there's the wet process. So a lot of farmers use a wet process, so it is out of the seed. And then some people just do a drying process where they'll leave the beans or the pulp seeds out for a while, and it'll just dry. Now the problem with that is once it gets wet again, it and the climates that we're growing coffee in is particularly rainy climates. Once it gets wet again, it's kind of like starting from scratch. So most of the time the farmers will use the wet process because it's a lot quicker. They can get it done. They don't need to wait for it to dry in the sun, and they don't need to worry about the rain coming to start from scratch all over again. So that's kind of one of the issues. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah.
So that is one of the reasons why potentially that they would use the water process to take a lot longer, and there's a potential for it to just kind of basically be ruined and start from scratch again if it rains. So yeah, I mean, these are all just different thoughts I've had. I like the idea of the tag teach kind of thing. But I think really it starts with dissemination too. So thinking about our science and how we can disseminate what we do to the coffee world. We're trying to do this with Opera Coffee, so using Opera Coffee to disseminate behavior analysis to the coffee world. I've been going to some different coffee talks and things outside of our industry, just to kind of promote the coffee, and also to talk a lot about our science and how we could essentially help the industry grow and develop and really develop safe working conditions for all involved, because it is a large process. You start from farm to roaster to barista who's at the end of the chain serving your coffee. It is a very long process. Obviously takes 5 years for a coffee plant to grow even, so that's a very long process. There's a lot of steps involved. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of financial things that are involved and environmental things that are involved. So really thinking about how our science can help this industry be more efficient and learn new skills to help them, help them do their jobs. I think that's really what I'd like to see happening in the next couple of years anyway. Any thoughts?
Beth, what was the name of the organization that you mentioned earlier that provides grants to discuss and to implement these sort of tactics?
The International Coffee Organization. They're actually a subset of the United Nations, or a subgroup of the United Nations. And they were formed, I want to say in the 60s, but they just recently amended like their bylaws and things like that. So their main mission is to really look at promoting the education of the farmers and people growing coffee, as well as to come up with strategies and solutions for limiting the environmental impact of coffee growing, as well as the financial impact of coffee growing. So they have like a whole website. So their website also focuses a lot on some of the things I covered today. But they do offer grants for people who could potentially come up with larger scale initiatives to address some of these issues, which I feel like behavior analysis should get involved with.
Yeah, agreed. I can totally see this as a dissertation for a PhD student. It's just so fascinating. It's so neat.
Yeah. So one other thing I thought about, because we have 10 minutes, and I don't know if I want to go down the rabbit hole, but some of you guys my interest as well in machine learning. So one of my thoughts, and for those of you who are not up to speed with machine learning, basically there's so much involved, but it's basically programming machines to learn new behaviors that are not already programmed, and that can be through different systems. But one of my thoughts is the technology piece. So a lot of involved with machine learning is like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, some of those things. Annie, you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But but one of my thoughts is the technology piece and creating systems within machine learning that can assist the farmers in the production of their coffee. Now, obviously, we would have to be able to get power sources and Wi-Fi technology in places that don't typically have it. But if we were able to do something like that, could we potentially decrease some of the safety concerns with a system that could essentially go through the process instead of the farmer? Thoughts on using machines to help the farmers?
So would you be talking about maybe having a machine do more so the physical aspects of the job, or is this more so based off of specific weather patterns or specific conditions on, say, the mountain range where the coffee is being grown? We can then figure out which part of the mountain should we grow our crops for this next cycle based off of, like, say, like patterns and algorithms that you can develop based
The prediction is
information. Yeah, okay.
The prediction is really more what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Because when we start to talk about replacing a workforce, that's where I get a little nervous.
That's a little, yeah, that is a little scary.
Especially when you're talking about people that this is their sole means of income, etc. But I'm thinking more along the lines of prediction.
Right.
So using this technology to help them make better decisions. Not better, and I don't want to put a judgment on their to keep on making better decisions as far as learning maybe specific patterns to help them predict where am I going to plant my next round of plants in the next 5 years. So I've analyzed the climate change or the patterns of pests from this amount of time to this amount of time, and maybe the next 5 years I'm going to plant the next round of crops in this area because it hasn't been as affected as before, and kind of using that technology to predict and help the farmers grow coffee in a different way. So that's kind of what I'm thinking too, along as another interest of mine that now that I'm loving machine learning and starting all that stuff, looking at how machine learning could potentially benefit the coffee industry as well. Obviously utilizing our science within that.
I absolutely love that idea. I wonder, there's going to have to be a very strong dissemination piece to that as well. I imagine there might be some farmers who may not be too keen to the idea of implementing such technology at first. So there's going to have to be some sort of shaping that would have to be involved.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the other thing is, if this is something where culturally the technology has not been there,
right,
or been part of the culture, we would have to work on cultural change as well within this. I mean I think with all of this it's going to be a cultural change as the overall goal, looking towards that shift. But yeah, so what other ideas or questions people have, strategies they've thought of? Kind of have a quiet group today.
I don't think the coffee has kicked in yet.
So, I'm still drinking mine, so. Any other questions, or even questions for me potentially about offering coffee?
Well, this is a question about coffee in general, since
Sure.
I don't know much about coffee. This is like very informative. Like, it's the first time I learned about coffee and not just drinking coffee, you know? How do they make decaffeinated coffee?
That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that.
Oh, I
I'd
always
have
wonder.
to Google that. See, I don't know the answer to that probably because I don't drink decaf coffee. Although I'm sure at some point I will have to, probably, because my coffee intake is getting to be extreme. How do they make coffee? Decaf coffee. I don't know. Anybody else out there know how they make decaf coffee? Nope. All right, I'm going to Google it since we don't have any other questions right now. Direct solvent-based process. Interesting. So they steam the beans for 30 minutes. Once the beans are receptive to the solvent, they're repeatedly rinsed with either, ooh. I don't know if you guys want to know how they make decaf coffee. So the beans are steamed, and once they're steamed, then they're rinsed with some sort of chemical. So ethyl acid or methylene chloride for 10 hours to remove the caffeine. So interesting. Learn something new every day.
What? They take green coffee, soak in hot water to draw the caffeine to the surface. Next, the bean are transferred to another container immersed in coffee oil. And then after several hours at high temperature, the triglyceride, whatever, oils, remove the caffeine from the beans.
And then they can roast it without the caffeine being in the beans.
That's so interesting. See, I learned something else that's new today.
Any other questions or comments or?
Can I get a vote? How many people drink their coffee black?
Me.
Too. Everyone else likes cream, sugar. I will, but I don't.
I drink coffee black as long as I don't have
Ooh, coconut creamer. That sounds good.
Yeah, if I don't have stevia, I'll just drink it black.
Wait, an egg yolk? What? So you just put an egg yolk in the coffee? Like black coffee? And blend it? What? I had never heard of that. How did you start doing that?
So the process of putting like butter and oils in coffee is like it's like bulletproof coffee is kind of what it's called. Started that process. I have not done it myself though, but Erin I think is trying to convert me to do it. So
it's like a keto style coffee. Like it's good. It's paleo friendly. It's like a new diet thing. I think the way people drink coffee is a lot of culturally it's a cultural product, you know, like some culture really likes black coffee and some likes, you know, cream and some like heavy cream, which is a little bit of coffee. It's just wide variety.
Yeah, definitely. It is cultural. I think that's really a great observation. It is definitely cultural.
I've never heard the egg thing. I don't know. The egg thing kind of throws me off right now. I have no idea where that comes from.
It's just multitasking. Then you don't have to eat your breakfast and drink your coffee at the same time.
Oh my god! Put them on one.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they want to add or talk about. We got 2 more minutes, I think. Otherwise.
Well, technically, the presentation we only need to last 50 minutes. So if you want to end it here, we can.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any questions or comments. So with that, that's all I got. So call to action is to think about maybe some ways that behavior analysis can help address these larger issues in the coffee industry. Check out the International Coffee Organization if you're interested in potential research projects. Because I think, like I said, they do have grants and stuff, which I will also be looking into probably in the next couple months. So
cool.
Yeah, and quickly before everyone goes, I'm reading the chat. And it seems like some folks were talking about different cultural connections with coffee and how folks take their coffee, which was kind of lovely. Condensed milk was placed out there as well, and then also the chocolate industry has a similar situation with coffee as well, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really fascinating,
Yeah.
Crystal. I think I definitely want to look that up. That looks really cool.
You can take a tour of the Ashkenazi chocolate here in Springfield.
Very, very cool. I'm looking into it right now, so
Okay. It's
yeah,
really cool.
very cool. It's why I'm so quiet. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Coffee. And hope you have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Thank you so much for coming to
Thank
the
you.
events. You should be able to get your CE certificate very soon once the survey is sent out and filled out. But if you have any questions, please email us.
Okay. Bye.